In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In this channel, we like to go verse by verse to understand what the Bible actually teaches us. And when we actually go verse by verse, you can see that the Bible is profound in literature. It's just amazing what you can get out of every single verse. In the last video, we actually left off in Genesis chapter 3, verse 13. So today we will continue with verse 14. Little quick recap, we see that Adam and his wife fell. They were tricked, at least Eve was tricked by this serpent creature into taking from the fruit of the tree that they were not supposed to take from. God clearly told them, the day that you shall eat from this tree, that's the day you will surely die. Well, they ate from the tree. She was tricked. Adam also takes from the fruit of the tree. And now we're actually going to see the curse. What God does. There's consequences for their sin. There's consequences for my sins. There's consequences for your sins. And this is exactly what God tries to portray here. There's consequences. And it's not like they didn't know. God made sure they understood what they were doing. And they did it anyways. So we'll continue with Genesis chapter 3. And now we're in verse 14. So let's continue reading. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. So we begin here with the curse. And the first curse is against this serpent reptilian creature that we know is the devil himself today. So notice how God is speaking to the serpent, which gives us an indication that maybe this serpent is not just a regular serpent, a regular snake. It's maybe a little bit more. Maybe this reptilian creature was more of a spiritual being as well. Maybe it was a physical representation of a spiritual being. And that's exactly what I want to get into. And this is just a theory in my part. I'm not very dogmatic on it. But I believe that whatever God does spiritually, He also does a physical representation here on earth. So that us humans, which are physical, we can actually see. So for example, the Garden of Eden is a physical representation of the throne of God. It was a dwelling place for the Spirit of God, where we can be connected to God physically and spiritually. Our free will, for example, the physical representation of it, I believe, was this tree that they were not supposed to eat of. I think that was a physical representation of our free will. Hell is physically represented by the core of the earth. And now we know that the earth has magma in its core. Stars, for example, are a physical representation of angels, I believe. There's only one indication in the Bible that kind of tells us where it might have been created. But they were definitely created before humans, and they were created for humans. They were not created before everything, because God creates everything in 6 literal days. Exodus 20:11. He created everything in those days. So angels were created beings, therefore they must have been created in those 6 days. When? Most likely when the stars were being created, because I believe that the stars are a physical representation of the angelical beings in heaven. And that still kind of fits with what Job actually tells us, that they were created during the foundations of the earth. There's one verse that I'd like to emphasize to kind of back up this theory. And it's actually found in Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. See, we don't fight against physical things here on earth. There's a spiritual realm outside of this physical realm that is actually partaking and controlling, you could say, pretty much everything that is physical around us. We can't see the spiritual world, but we can definitely see the physical world. And I believe God, whatever He does spiritually, also represents it in a way physically here on earth as well. So a great example of this, when somebody you see out in the street is battling against drug addiction, it looks like a drug addiction to us, but behind it, there's something spiritual going on. But the physical representation of it is an addiction to drugs. So it gets me to this point. This reptilian serpent-like being could be a physical representation of an angelical being in heaven. And there's at least 3 different types of angelical beings in heaven. I'm not going to get too much into it. That's a video for another day, because there's so much into that, honestly. There's a lot. But I want to talk about the Seraphim. And this is a type of spiritual being found in heaven. And actually angels and these spiritual beings, we often think about them as, for example, some of them have baby features, right? With beautiful wings on their side, and they sound so angelical, right? Or there's these other angels where they look like humanoid creatures with white robes and wings on them. Well, in reality, when you look at the Bible and how it describes angels, they're not like that actually at all. When we actually look at the description of what the Bible actually tells us these spiritual beings look like, they are actually quite frankly very frightening. And that's a video for another day. So the seraphim. So when we look at the seraphim, and this is actually found in Isaiah 6, 1 through 4. These seraphim are actually described to have 3 sets of wings, 2 wings to cover their feet, 2 wings to cover their face, and then 2 wings that allow them to fly. They're also described as choir singing beings that just sing to the Lord, holy, 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 near his throne. You can actually see that maybe if this seraphim is the devil, then you can kind of see the alignment of the story there. You know, he wants everybody to worship him. He's been worshiping God his whole life. That's his whole purpose. And he rebelled against God and wanting everybody to worship him instead. You know, there's something there. So if this spiritual being can talk, then maybe this physical being was able to speak as well. I don't know. Let's look at the word for seraphim and let's break it down so we can understand why am I trying to portray that this physical representation of the seraphim could be a snake. Well, when we look at the word for seraphim, it's actually compounded of 2 words. Seraph, which actually means snake or serpent, and oftentimes can be considered specifically a cobra. And when we look at the other word that combined, seraphim, the fim part actually means burning. The burning snake or the burning one, some scholars actually say, but more specifically I would say the burning snake is what it actually kind of translates to. Burning snakes or snakes or these dragons, reptilian creatures have been found in mythology, I mean throughout the generations, right? We look at the Chinese, for example, they really take into consideration dragons and these serpent and reptilian like creatures that can breathe fire from their mouth, right? Or the Egyptians, for example, have a snake on their crown. At least the pharaohs do. The seraphim, these burning snakes, are around the temple of God, around the throne of God, which is why throughout history, throughout mythology, many kings and rulers have a snake near their throne. Another thing is with the snake, for example, throughout mythology, is that they bring enlightenment, right? And this is exactly what the devil, Satan, this reptilian dragon, snake creature, whatever you want to call him, the seraphim, tries to do. He tries to enlighten them. And that's the whole New Age movement, right? There's a lot of religions, once again, that indicate that this snake was enlightening them and giving them knowledge and understanding and actually helped them escape from the grasp of God. He didn't want them to learn all these new things. Well, that's a Luciferian ideology. New Age ideology that is completely unbiblical and actually satanic. So let's look at the physical representation of the seraphim. When we look at a snake, and actually most of the time particularly a cobra, when we look at the physical representation, if this is a physical representation of the seraphim, when we look at the physical representation of a cobra, it makes perfect sense. They have this extra skin that pops out every time they feel threatened or they're about to attack. And they actually spit out venom that causes a burning sensation, and usually it's aimed at the eyes. This extra skin is actually called the labials on a cobra. So maybe the seraphim, spiritually speaking, have these wings that cover their face. Well, maybe physically, the physical representation of it, the cobra, the snake, this reptilian creature, has these labials that also cover their face. And when uncovered, it spits out a burning sensation, just like the name seems to portray, the burning snake. So maybe, or metaphorically, a comparison here could be that Adam and Eve were both rubbing their eyes because this snake moved his wings, his covering of his face, his labials, shoots out this piece of knowledge, right? This enlightenment into their eyes, and now they can see. It's a metaphorical comparison, which is why their eyes are opened, because they rub their eyes to try to get whatever the burning sensation was, and their eyes are now open. Who told you that you were naked, right? That's what God tells them. So metaphorically and spiritually, this is the way that, at least for me, my brain tries to wrap everything around, right? Again, I'm not very dogmatic on this, but it makes some sense to me. You know, so regardless, whatever it is, if it's literally a snake, a cobra, or if it's this dragon-like creature, the ancient dragon, like in Revelations 12 it says, the old serpent, or if it's literally Satan himself, possessing this snake, or if it's literally a seraphim, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. What we know for sure, as Revelation 12:4 says that this old serpent, that the dragon, the ancient dragon, is the devil himself, Satan himself, the deceiver, the one who rebelled against God spiritually, and now is pursuing for man and his woman to rebel against God themselves too. There was a spiritual rebellion, and it also manifests itself physically here on earth through Adam and Eve. So anyways, now let's get back to the actual curse. What does God do to the snake for sinning, for rebelling against him? So God curses the snake, and now it causes it to drag itself on its belly. And it says that it's cursed above all the animals, above all the cattle of the earth. So now, if God curses it to drag on its belly, it means that it did not drag on its belly before. Otherwise, what's the point of the curse? So this is why I like to say that this physical representation of the seraphim, this serpent, probably had another means of transportation. So it did not drag on its belly before this. It had some other way. Maybe it had feet. Maybe it had wings. And we know that in a spiritual representation, it does have wings to fly. It does have wings to cover its feet. So maybe God spiritually takes away those wings to fly, and also it affects this physical being. Who knows? So because of that, because God took away their flight or their wings, or maybe their feet, who knows, now it crawls on its belly. Weirdly enough, cobras, and specifically cobras, have the tendency to be able to stand up straight, right up. I mean, they're obviously a whole muscle, so they can physically stand right up, but maybe there was something there. Maybe they had feet, which could be represented spiritually by the wings that it has on its feet. I don't know. I do want to point one last thing about the snake, and I promise this is the last thing about it. But evolutionists claim that snakes might have had legs before, but it evolved out of them. Which for me kind of, first of all, it's ironic. It's kind of dumb. It's kind of stupid because, you're supposed to be getting better. How is losing a leg getting better? That's the opposite of evolution. But anyways, it's dumb. Okay, anyways, scientifically speaking, maybe they did have legs, but God cursed the snake and took away their ability to walk or climb on their feet, right? Maybe this is why they now drag on their belly. Who knows? Although some scientific textbooks also mention that the bones are actually mistaken for feet, but in reality these bones are for sexual reproduction. So, we don't really know. The point is, now it drags on its belly as the consequences for its actions. The second part of the curse for the snake is that it has to eat from the dust of the ground now, which also it's a direct consequence of now not being able to either fly or walk. God took away that feature. Now they have to drag on their belly, so therefore they have to obviously eat from the dust of the ground. It makes perfect sense. So it's a cause and effect kind of thing. But at the same time, this is a very deep spiritual lesson for us, for Christians, for you and for me, because they eat out of the dust of the ground now. They are forced to crawl on their bellies to eat from the dust of the ground. God makes Adam out of the dust of the ground. Remember that in Genesis 2:7. He forms him out of the dust of the ground. And I like to point this out, but the Jews, and actually a lot of creation stories out there, which weirdly enough, very closely similar to this creation story. Now, they say that God formed man out of clay. Well, if it was made out of clay, then clay, you need water for it to be able to be morphed and formed into a human. You can't just make a human out of dust. You need water to be able to mold him. Obviously, God, all powerful, he can do whatever he wants. But just logically thinking about it, it makes sense that maybe God did make us out of clay. And I like to point this out because this is a huge spiritual lesson for us as Christians. Jesus himself is the river of flowing waters. He is our drinking water, which is needed not only for us physically. Obviously, we're more than 70% water. But also for our spiritual Christian life. We need that water, which is Jesus Christ, which is him. And this is all in John 7:37 and 38. So as Christians, we must always be drenched in his water, drenched in God, dressed in Jesus himself, because we are the dust of the ground. We are made from the dust of the ground. And if we are dry dust, the snake will devour us, because that is what is commanded to eat now. Dust of the ground. So see how easy it is, spiritually speaking, for the devil to come at you when you are not drenched with Christ, when you don't quench that thirst that you have for Christ. Spiritually speaking, we all have that thirst for God. If we don't quench that thirst, it is easy for this snake, for the devourer, for the devil himself to devour us, because we are dust of the ground. But if we are drenched with God, we become clay. And you know how hard it is to swallow clay. I mean, you probably don't know, but you know what I mean. But if we are drenched by the springs of water, we can be like clay. And now we are moldable, so that each day we can appear to be more like the image of God. Remember, we are the image of God, or at least we were supposed to be until we fell. Remember, a snake can't really eat moldable, soft clay, but it can definitely eat the dry dust of the ground. Verse 15, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. This verse is just fascinating. This is my favorite verse of the whole chapter. It's just fascinating to me. And I'm going to have to make another video just on this verse because it's outstanding. It's amazing what you can get out of it. It's just insane. But this verse starts a spiritual, historical war between Satan and God. And it's also the first ever prophecy in the Bible, at least from what I can see. But this deserves a video all on its own, so I'm not going to get too much into it. It's a very powerful verse. But essentially, this verse declares war. God declares war between him and Satan, between the seed of the woman and the seed of the snake. We've seen the seed of the woman, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a hint. Can a woman have a seed? No, usually the man has the seed, biologically speaking. So this gives us an indication that if the seed comes from the woman, it must be a virgin birth only. So we know who the seed of the woman is. I'm pretty sure you can guess, and that's Jesus. However, we don't know just yet who the seed of the snake is. Once again, I'm going to leave that in a little bit of a cliffhanger, and we'll talk about that in a new video here in the coming months. Verse 16, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be for thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. So God curses the snake, crawl on its belly, eat from the dust of the ground, and then now he curses the woman. And to the woman, it will be, her desire will be just for her husband, and he shall rule over you, the woman. And in sorrow you shall bring forth children, and it will be greatly multiplied. When you have a child in conception, it will be greatly multiplied. The pain will be greatly multiplied. So in this verse, God curses the woman for disobeying God's law. He greatly multiplies her birth pains. So if he greatly multiplies her birth pains, then obviously that gives us an indication that there was already some form of pain before, most likely. Therefore, he greatly exceeds the pain that she already, by default, already had. Also, I would like to add that it would bring sorrow to bear children, not just physically, but because they're in a fallen world. It's going to be so difficult to bear children, to raise kids. Why? Because of the fallen state that they're in, the sinful state that they're in. It's just like God's children, Adam and the woman, right? God wanted everything perfect for them. God wanted to be the perfect father. He wanted them to be under their rulership, under his wisdom. But the children wanted to be under their own wisdom. And they wanted to rule over themselves, over their own wisdom. And that's exactly what they did. That's the indication. As soon as they bit forth from that fruit, they fell. And now God was like, all right, you want to be your own ruler? You want to rule over your own wisdom? All right, here it goes. It's going to hurt me because I know what's going to happen. I know that you're going to have trouble because I'm not going to be able to help you out because you wanted to rule over yourself. And that's exactly what's going to happen with Adam and Eve when they bear children. They have to deal with the same exact thing they did to God. Their kids will do the exact same thing to them. And it's going to be hard. They're going to feel that pain that God felt when they sinned against him. They're going to feel that pain. And actually, in Genesis chapter 4, we see exactly that. The pain of this new world, of this fallen state, the sinful world that they are now a part of. We'll see that in the next chapter. So now instead of being partners in relationship like God wanted them, now instead of the woman will be under the authority of the husband, her desire will be forever to please him. When before, they were both under the same mind and the same authority together. But because she left her place, and because of Adam not protecting her and not guiding her, the foundation of what God wanted it to be as a marriage was shaken. And here are the consequences for that. Verse 17, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, and sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. And we'll keep going. Verse 18, thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Verse 19, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for thou of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. God curses the snake, God curses the woman, God curses the man. For giving up his spot as the primal authority in his family, God curses him. He wasn't able to take care of his wife's steps, so God curses him. And he curses the ground. No longer will his food be as easy as being able to take from a tree. Remember, they had many trees around them, or being able to eat from the provided plants of the earth. Now he must cultivate the ground, and through the sweat of his head he shall eat now thereof. God will not sustain him and his family anymore. They wanted to rule over themselves. Alright, it's going to be hard for you, son. But God was like, I will not sustain you anymore. I will not sustain for your family anymore. The garden which I provided for you with everything is no longer yours. You must pave your own path, and with your own hands you must provide for your family. I will no longer provide for you because you wanted to do it by yourself, for yourself, through your own wisdom. That's exactly what you'll get. But there's consequences for your actions, son. They wanted to rule under their own wisdom and not God's. The sustainer of life is removed from them. The sustainer of their setting of food is removed. So once again, I believe God curses them spiritually, but those curses are also manifested physically. In this case, the ground, the earth itself, is now sterilized, and it can no longer bring forth food, most likely such as before they sinned. God curses the ground, also bringing forth thorns and weeds and deserts. We see that in the previous verse, in verse 18. So now there's harsh climate, most likely, when before there probably wasn't. So maybe now the whole world was not perfect at all. Remember, God made the world to be habitable. But I believe that after they sinned, God made it difficult for inhabiting. And that's mainly because God was pushed away. The source of life, the source of food was moved out of there. He no longer sustained it. Therefore, when there is no light, darkness approaches. The light was taken out, darkness was forever seen upon the earth. So maybe, just maybe, there was literally no such thing as deserts, harsh climate, weeds that kill other food providing plants. Maybe, just maybe, roses, for example, didn't have any thorns. So the last curse is not only for Adam, but for humanity in general. God's hand was no longer holding humanity together. They rejected his ruling over them with their actions, wanting to rule over themselves and only for themselves. God gives them what they want. His life-giving hand no longer upholds them. Their sin separates them from God. The eternal life-giving source leaves them. That day they will surely die. They died. Spiritually, they died. They were separated from God. That's exactly what the Bible says. We're separated from God because of our sin. They not only died spiritually, but physically as well. Their days were numbered for, and they were slowly dying. Till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. So anyways, guys, this has been the curses that God gives as a consequences for their actions. Therefore, this cannot be good at all. This is not good. God did not want him to die. God did not want to curse him. So when somebody says, oh, it's a good thing that the devil, no, it's not good at all. It's a satanic idea. I don't know how people can think about that. Anyways, no longer is God the provider of anything anymore, because we rejected him. We rejected his wisdom. We wanted to rule over ourselves, rule with our own wisdom, and that's exactly what God gives them. But there's consequences for that. And the consequence is death. The wages of sin is death, and only through Jesus Christ can we get salvation. Anyways, guys, this has been the video for the week, and just please make sure to subscribe, comment, like, and share these videos. Anyways, guys, God bless you guys. Until next time.